and Peter asked me to help with the evaluation of data. So there's been a lot of data collected, in fact over 1 million data points, which the more I got into it, the more I thought, what am I doing? So rather than kind of blind you all with data today, my job was to try and extract relevant information out of the data sets to share with you. Now, having said that, unavoidably, I do have to show you some graphs. At times you may feel like you're at a rave party with lines going everywhere, but just stay sitting, stay calm, and everything will be okay, it will pass. This was actually the point of the soil temperature evening out better shown on the control, because the control has got no mulch at all, and we see that it's much more reactive to environmental temperatures compared to the fine mulch, which provides the most effective insulation and the most effective blanketing, gives us very even soil temperatures. And of course, why are soil temperatures and the evenness of soil temperatures important is primarily because of the conditions in the soil that the workers in the soil, which is the soil biology, enjoy most. So like all of us, we want to have fairly even temperatures and even conditions to survive and prosper. We don't particularly enjoy it if temperatures are going from 5 degrees to 40 degrees on a daily basis. That's going to stress us, and similarly it's going to stress the soil system, and it will stress the plants as well. So if we can provide a more even temperature and moisture environment in the soil, that is an advantage. This is an interesting example that only came to our attention a couple of days ago when Joe identified this interesting phenomenon in the data. And here we have a rainfall event which occurred in the 3rd week of April. And this is the control. So we had the soil was reasonably dry, we had a rainfall event, and over the week or so that this data is presenting, we see little change in that. The soil has stayed fairly constantly wet. This is 0 here, so this is kind of field capacity where we'll see moisture almost to the surface. So just below that is where we're at very high moisture contents in the soil. So this is the control with no mulch at all, bare ground. When we look at the other 2 companion rows for the same week, the same rainfall event, this is the coarse mulch here, and this is the fine mulch here. What's really interesting under these 2 rows is we have quite a different moisture pattern in only this week after the rainfall event. In both instances, we can demonstrate that we've had significantly increased drainage in the profile in both of these sites. Now, one of the things that we observe under mulch, at least under compost, and particularly where the compost has been applied for a number of years, is we get improved structure in the soil, we get improved structure at depth in the soil. And so we have this phenomenon where soils drain better but hold more water. So it seems a bit counterintuitive, but really what's happening is because of root action, because of the action of worms and other soil organisms, we're getting connectivity of pore spaces in the soil through which the soil can drain and breathe. Roots can obviously follow, go down deep and explore larger volumes of soil. Contrast that to a soil that is not displaying the same degree of structure at all, nor the same degree of drainage. So obviously where we have water hanging around like this for a considerable amount of time, the plants are going to get more stressed. Now this is where the rave really kicks in. But so forgive all the lines. There's just a few key points that I want to make with these 3 graphs, and I think they're the last ones I have to show you. November data, again on Hunts Road. I was asked to look at this especially because I think in the 1st and going on to the 2nd week of November, it was an extremely hot week. And in fact, that's what these data are telling us. So we see that the top air temperatures were over 40 degrees between, that's the 8th and that's the 15th there. So we had quite extreme days, and I understand that managers of vineyards are quite concerned about, well, how do I manage these extreme days? Do I just, suddenly do I have to start pumping water out there to help the vines cope with this stress? What is the best strategy? So we looked and saw, okay, well, we've got this associated fairly rapid drying of the profile, the blue line, to this point here of 25 kilopascals, which is not super dry, but it's certainly showing that it's responding to the high external temperatures. But when we look at the soil temperatures, we can see that it's a much bouncing around quite a bit because of that diurnal variation. And we have a topsoil temperature of about 26 degrees, a little bit higher towards the very end of the month as temperatures start to climb again. So the 41 degrees is going to be fairly constant through the three graphs. We're looking at what the top dry is and the soil temperature is under the two compost treatments. So under the coarse treatments, we've got a top dry of 17 kPa. So that means a lot more moisture is being retained under the mulch here. 25 kPa was the value under the control. And the soil temperature here is a couple of degrees less. I think we had 26 degrees. And here we've got 23 degrees. That's a significantly cooler profile. And then under the fine mulch, we have another degree down. We have same ambient temperature, and we've got another point down on the amount of moisture still in the system. And you'll also notice that the temperature variation, the diurnal variation, is smoother than on the control. So if we go back through the three treatments, you'll see that the difference between peak daytime temperature and peak nighttime temperature is getting smaller as we step through the treatments. So what does it all mean? What are we trying to achieve? So there's quite a focus on reducing or eliminating herbicide use, and there's been some mention of that already. And certainly when we go into any vineyard or orchard, weeds under the crop are a serious problem. And of course, the most convenient way to manage those is with herbicides. But even if you've never been into a vineyard, you've been into a local park and you've seen this dead zone along by the footpath where the workers spray herbicide, routinely every month to keep the grass well back from the path. And these, over time, become fairly dead zones. And one of the characteristics of that is we'll see moss and algae growing on the surface of soils. The soils have completely lost their structure. Usually they're really sealed. So when it does rain, we get very little water moving into those profiles. And because they tend to be hilled as well, often it just runs off. And those algae and mosses, they're the earliest colonizers, some of the most primitive forms of plant life. They're trying to recolonize that ground, but it's generally an indication that the biological activity in those surface soils is pretty low. So we understand somehow that there is a relationship between improved soil quality and plant health, and that has been demonstrated more than enough times for us to appreciate that that's a worthwhile goal to pursue. Just like us, if we're under stressed or we're unwell or our living environments are compromised, we're going to be more susceptible to getting colds and whatever else. Similarly with plants, there's been I guess it's been part of the creed with vineyards that vines need to be stressed. I wonder how stressed the vines need to be. Sure, we don't want high amounts of vigor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to have a stranglehold on the plants at the same time. We want to improve water use efficiency, of course, and we've seen evidence that covering the soil and protecting that surface layer is doing a lot to help us reduce the water demand by retaining water in the topsoils and by reducing evapotranspiration from the surface. Biological health is so important for so many reasons, and the more we're looking into soil biology, the more we're understanding why that's the case. So if we understand that nothing gets into the plant, no food, no nutrient gets into a plant without it being processed by some kind of soil organism in advance, then we'll understand that if we don't have good functioning in the soil ecosystem, plants are going to struggle to acquire the necessary nutrients for growth. Improving yield, obviously we all want to improve yield, and we would like to improve resistance to pest and disease attack as well. And ultimately, product quality. So in summary, the trial data confirms previous research that shows improvement in soil moisture and in soil moisture consistency. improvement in the evenness of soil temperature, improved protection on very hot days, and that's protection to the vines and to the stresses that they will experience on those days, improvement in soil structure, which I've talked about, and I say possible increase in soil microbial biomass in these trials. And certainly we have seen increases. You know, in the case of the active fungi, we saw a 400% increase. And that's over a relatively short time in response to a single application of compost. There's no doubt that if you're feeding the soil annually with compost, then we are going to see a response from the soil microbiological community. Most important to emphasize, though, the treatments can't be one-offs. You know, I've seen so many times farmers and growers go out and say, I'm going to put compost out because it's going to make me feel good and I'm sure that's what my soil wants. And they put compost out and then they don't do anything again. And I've had farmers say, oh yeah, I did that once and it didn't do anything. So we have to understand what contribution compost is making, how it works, and how completely differently it's working and the different job it's doing compared to conventional fertilizers. So if we understand that compost application involves feeding the soil to get the benefits from the soil workers that we're looking for, then we can't give them, we can't you know, treat them with a feast or famine regime. The analysis of compost and soil or plant condition is required to improve agronomic practice. So as I said before, we need to understand what we're actually putting in by way of nutrients to the soil so that we can adjust our other agronomic inputs to optimize vine health and yield. And I make the point that any organic input is worthwhile. So, you know, Joe has been putting stable manure on 100 hunts for some time, and the benefit of that is showing up in the soil tests in terms of the nutrient profile, but also the example that we looked at about those rows that were composted and the improved drainage that we saw in those rows.